Hey folks, it's James, and today's video is a bit longer than usual, but for a good reason. We're exploring detailed techniques for rendering floor plans using Procreate, straight from my workshop at UCLA. This tutorial isn't just about floor plans. You can use these same techniques for rendering elevations too. But to keep things moving, I've sped up the footage about 1.5 times normal speed, just so you can get the gist of it without the slow pace needed for the usual live draw-along sessions. Although the video is packed with tips, I've marked each chapter in the description below, so you can come back to it and skip to whatever part you need. I know it's a lot to cover, but some ideas just can't be squeezed into a short video. So grab your iPad, download the Procreate file linked below, and let's get started. So we'll just start from scratch here. And my strategy for these as a professional renderer is to work from large to small, okay? So the first thing I'm interested in is the floor color, all right? The next thing we're going to do is start to add layers for colors. Okay, we're going to add one color per layer to keep this nice and simple. So I'll tap the add button, and up comes that layer. But we're going to do a thing here where all of our colors are going to be under the line drawing so that none of them start to cover up these line drawings. So I'm going to tap and hold the plan drawing layer until it sort of becomes animated like this. And I'm going to drag it up and release it above that first layer of color, okay? And I'll do one more thing about this too. I'm going to actually, and I'll give you a quick demonstration. Nobody has to worry about it. But here I am in layer 2 and what we just added. I'm just going to randomly pick a flat marker brush, okay? And I've got a color that's randomly selected. And I'll go back in, double check that I'm in the right layer. And I'm going to start drawing on this, okay? And watch what happens. Absolutely nothing, okay? But that's because it's hidden under what is presently an opaque drawing. So in this upper layer, we're going to switch over what's called the blending mode. And we're going to tap on the N, which means normal. And here we have a couple of options. One option is opacity, and that's the opacity of the entire layer. But I like to stay away from that because that can get you into trouble later. And we'll explain that down the road a bit. So instead what you want to do, and this is from all of our Photoshop days, is you want to sort of move this menu until you get to this multiply blending mode. And as you all recall, multiply blending mode means anything darker you will still see underneath. And in our case, and I'll go ahead and tap this layer so that it closes up and organizes everything. And in this case, that red, that tomato red, is darker than the white of this drawing. So we now have what is essentially a clear background and a black line drawing, and that's what we want to start adding colors, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and this time I'm going to clear this color. I don't want to delete this layer because I did want a layer. So now I'm just going to tap once on that layer, and I'm going to get the pop-up menu, and I'm just going to tap clear, and that's going to just wipe all of that out completely. Okay. So the big trick here that we're going to use, and what saves us a lot of time here, is we're not going to be coloring like you do with colored pencils or chalks or even watercolor. We're going to be coloring in something I call selecting and filling. And the first part is selecting and filling, and it's very similar. Again, it's very similar to Photoshop, using the paint bucket and a selection. The first thing we're going to do is pick a color for the wood floor. We're going to call it a wood floor with a carpet on top. And I'm going to use one of those beautiful gray stained wood floors. And again, another superpower of Procreate is I don't have to pick the right color. I don't have to worry about picking the right color because it's going to be adjustable later. But for now, on my iPad, you guys go ahead and pick whatever you want. I'm going to pick this gray. It's a slightly darker than the lightest gray that I have right here. And you can see that it loads itself up here right away, okay? And now, so with that safely picked, I'm going to go over to the selection icon, and I'm going to choose, and this could come up for you in any of these modes. I'm going to choose the rectangular selection mode, okay? And this is where the real speed of Procreate rendering comes in. I'm going to choose selection mode, and I'm going to tap at the top left corner of this room, not worried about any of the furniture at all, and just tap and drag across until I get to the lower right and release. And there go the Procreate's version of the marching ants that we get with Photoshop, okay? And so now that area is selected, I can go into the layer menu. I can tap this layer that's waiting for some sort of color to happen. And I will go, in this drop-down menu, I will go to Fill Layer, and in comes that gray color, okay? Later on, if we adjust this layer, and it won't ever get simpler than this all by itself, we're going to go into what's called the Adjustments menu, which is this magic wand up here. I'm going to tap it once, opens the menu. At the very top is the command you will use by far the most often, adjusting hue, saturation, and brightness. And this is all straight up out of Photoshop. And in here, you can adjust the brightness and the darkness of that gray, or the saturation. Now, because it's a gray, it's going to be a little less, it's more difficult to figure out what the secondary color is inside that gray. But if this was a brighter color, you can adjust the saturation there. And then you can adjust the hue. And again, it's a gray, so we'll leave it alone for now. But I just wanted to show you where these controls were. So I'll adjust that gray. I'll come back and tap this layer icon. And notice when you tap an icon or you tap the screen, it generally clears the last command you make, so I no longer have to worry about the selection button over here. I'll just tap that layer again. And now I'm going to add a layer on top of this because we're going to start building from the bottom up. The last thing we'll get to will be these tables and chairs and probably these lamps here. But now I'm going to add a layer. And the next layer for me, it doesn't have to be perfect, but the next layer for me is going to be this, the rug under the furniture. And for that, I think I'll just use, again, temporarily, but I'll use some sort of tomato red color for this carpet, okay? And so now the color is selected, and this is generally my sequence of events is I'll get the color first, and now I'll come over to the selection menu again, and I'm in rectangle selection, so it's ready to go. And this time I'll tap and hold, and now I can't see that lower corner, but I can look over here and make sure it's lined up there, and I can look here and make sure it's lined up there. And at some point I'll just release it, and there are my marching ants, and we're ready to fill that color. Now the first time we filled that color, we filled it from inside the layer, right? We went to the new layer that we created, and before what we did was we tapped on that layer, and we had the option to hit the fill layer. And I'll go ahead and do that. But I want to show you one more thing that sometimes is faster. So I'm going to use 2 fingers again, and we'll tap so that goes away. But my marching ants are still in place. And now I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to tap down and hold this tomato red icon and drag it over, just right across this menu, and release it. Let's see if it works. So I tap, drag, and release. And there it goes. And I'll practice that again. I'll hit 2 fingers. And this is just a fantastic skill because it saves you so much time over that other thing where you go into the layer and tap it and go to select and fill. So this is well worth practicing because if you tap and hold, it's going to switch to the last color you used. So I'll tap and hold again, and it's back to that tomato red. So that can be a time saver, but it can also confuse people when you're first learning this. All right, so now I've got 2 colors so far. And again, I don't want to judge myself yet. They're pretty crazy colors, and they may have nothing to do with where I end up. So next biggest thing, I'm thinking, let's make it this sideboard beneath the projection screen, or maybe this, and then we'll go to this mantle. So let's go to the sideboard, and let's make this a more traditional wood color, and we're set for the next layer. Now remember, we're always going to keep the plan on top because we want to see these colors come through that drawing. So I'll add a new layer, and this time we're going to make this wood. Let's make it a light oak sideboard beneath the screen. So I'll go searching through my woods, and I'm really terrible at picking wood colors. They always end up being way too strong. But I'll pick this one here. Got a little bit of warmth to it. Probably too much of a skin color, but let's start there. And what I'll do this time is I'll tap this again just to make that interface go away. And now I'm going to use a different selection strategy. I'm going to go back into the selection tool and tap the icon. Now this is not a straight up rectangle, so I'm going to use something different this time. I'm going to use the freehand selection tool. And just because it's called freehand doesn't mean I have to literally, I can go like this, but it's not going to be very accurate, right? And then close it up. And now I've got the marching ants, but I've done a terrible job of selecting it. So this is the other great thing about this. I'll use 2 fingers to tap back to 0. My selection tool is still selected in freehand. And now what I'm going to do is tap on each corner. Just tap once, come over, tap twice, tap 3 times. And you can see where this will help you pick out very complicated shapes. Because you can also, don't forget, you can combine that freehand as well as these taps. But by using these taps, you can very quickly create these regular shapes, okay? And now to save time, I'm going to just go back up to the color, which is why I pre-selected it. And I'm going to drag it and drop it into there, okay? So if I undo my selection tool, and again, this is why I wait until the end to come back, but you can see that's too much of a salmon color. It doesn't look like the light oak that I'm after. But again, the beauty that it's on its own layer is if I really wanted to adjust it right now, just to make the point for all you guys, I could now go to the adjustments tool and tap hue, saturation, and brightness. And my instinct from being a watercolor all these years is that it needs to be desaturated. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's just lightened. Nope, it's desaturated too. So then I'll make these adjustments, and I might even adjust the hue to make it more yellow like an oak. And there you go. You'll find yourself playing around with these quite a bit. But it's also a fantastic teacher because you'll learn so much about color as you do that kind of thing. So I'll pick up the pace a little bit here. Now that we know our basics, I'll go back, and our next layer is going to be the hearth of the fireplace. So I'll make sure, now wherever you've got highlighted, when you add a layer, it's going to go immediately above the highlighted layer. So I'm going to go to the top of the layers that I've been adding, and highlight that, the top one below the drawing. And then I'm going to tap the plus arrow. And now, and this is the fun part for all you guys. Now I'm going to pick out, I think I'm going to use a dark gray brick for the mantle. So I'll pick out this dark gray, and I'll go back. That's preloaded, I like to say. And I'll go back to the selection tool and rectangle. And now again, and this is the best you can do, and Katrina, it's really, there's no scientific way to get these intersections exactly, but you just make it as big as you can while still seeing your both targets, where you'll start and where you'll end. And then pop it in there, drag it. There are my ants. And now I drag it and bring it over. And I'm going to undo that. And so there we go so far. I misspoke. I'm actually going to do these chairs first, okay? So I'll start with this sectional. And I'll make sure I've kind of forgot, this is this taking stock moment where every once in a while you forget, wait, where am I again? And so I haven't made this new layer yet, so I'll make that new layer. And I'm going to go back to the selection tool now. And I'm going to stay in rectangle mode because this, even though it's got these rounded edges, the big picture is that I'm going to be able to get away with this rectangle. So I'm going to make this two rectangles. I'm going to stretch this and pull it across. And there's rectangle one. And it's still alive, so to speak, so I can just tap and stretch again, and that will automatically add to that rectangle, okay? And we haven't talked about this, but you can see down here that it's been in this, what's called add mode. So you can keep adding things like that by default, okay? And now I will go, and remember, I'm just going to have faith that I'm in the right layer because I've checked it obsessively. And I'll grab this color and I'll drag it and drop it. And there it is. And that's even, yeah, I'll just leave it like that, very dangerous, but I'll leave it like that. And let's do the same color. Let's say that this swivel chair, for ease of creation, are both the same color. So I can keep these, in this case, I can keep these on the same layer since they'll always change together, okay? And what I'll do now is I'll go back to the selection tool while I'm still in that layer. And notice when I tap this, to Nihal's point, when I tap this, this will go away. So you can just keep moving without doubling up your operation. So I'll tap this, the layers menu goes away, this is activated, but I can't use the rectangle this time because I don't have, now if I try to use the rectangle, it's just going to make a rectangle, and then I'm in trouble. So I'll use 2 fingers to undo that, and I'll switch to the freehand tool this time, even though it still is a rectangle, but I'll just do 4 taps on the freehand tool. And if you want to get fancy at this point, you can say, well, no, I really want to get that gentle curve in. So you can switch from tapping to actual freehand drawing at any moment. And now I've just made my way around that slight curve. I can go back to tapping mode here. And now I can go back to freehand mode again. It's really cool. And now I can just close that out with the last single tap. And now I'll drag and drop across. And I'll tap the selection mode to get back out again. And there we go. Slowly but surely, it's adding up. Okay, so, and then this is where my abilities as an interior designer quickly run out. But let's now do the circular table and the ottoman. And let's start with the ottoman. And all of yours are going to be beautiful, I know. Now I'm going to make my ottoman, I'm going to give it a glass top, okay? So I'll pick ahead of time what I would consider a base color to represent glass, even though very often glass can be clear, but I'm using more symbolic language here. So I'll tap this kind of very light, it's almost like a robin's egg blue here. And that's preloaded now. While I'm right up here conveniently, I'll double check that I've added, yep, I remember I have added a layer. And now I'm going to go to the selection tool, and this time I'm going to use, I should say that probably the safest thing for most people is just to tap their way around this. And you can be fairly imprecise, but that will work. But I like to use the ellipse tool. And the key to the ellipse tool is that I'll show you what happens if you try and start drawing the ellipse on this line. I start on the line and I drag it across, and then I'm like, wait, what went wrong? Well, what the ellipse tool is doing, it's saying that the first point you touch will be the point of a rectangle that contains the ellipse that you're drawing. So what you're basically doing, and I'll show you an estimate of it here. What you're basically doing is in your mind, or actually, I think you'll get so good at this, you'll be doing it in your mind. In your mind, you're visualizing this corner right up here. And so you're going to start, and what I do is I often will do this just in my imagination or on, physically above the screen. So I'm going to tap here, which I think is that corner, pull down and release. And you can see that I pretty much got it. And I certainly got it good enough for our purposes. And I'll stretch that and add that glass layer to that. Okay, and then I think to make things simple, no, I was going to make that blue too, but I'll change that. I'll make that a different color. Let's go and we'll add, now we're going to embellish this, but I just want to show you the basics at first. So I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to add my last part, which is this little circular table. And I think that'll make that the darkest gray we've used yet. I'll go with this dark gray. And that's preloaded now. And I'll go back to ellipse. So we'll get a second chance to practice this ellipse thing. And again, I've got my pencil above the glass of the screen, and I'm just kind of doing this so I can get my own bearings. Now I'm going to tap and pull and release, and then I'm going to drag and drop, and then undo the selection tool, and now I've got my basic colors. Your rooms are always going to be a lot more special than this and a lot more beautiful than this. And by that I mean you're going to add textures. Generally, when you do these rendered floor plans, you're going to add textures and shadows, okay? So here's where the fun comes in. And we'll start, again, we'll go back to that philosophy of the largest surfaces first, okay? So what I want to do is add some lines, some wood grain, both wood joints and wood grain to this gray floor. So we'll tap the layers menu again to remind ourselves where that wood layer is. And I'm going to highlight that wood layer because the operations I'm about to do are going to be on top of that wood layer, okay? So I'm going to add a layer above this. And now I'm going to add what you would call, I guess, the joints for that wood, okay? And I want to make those joints straight, and I want to work quickly, and I want to draw them underneath all this other stuff so I don't have to worry about erasing things if I went over the line or that kind of thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick a color for the joints. And I think I like the idea of it being, at least for starters, being this gray here, that we used before. But I'll just go randomly into my palettes again. And I'll just pick, I could even pick black. I'm going to pick this gray, but I could just as easily pick black. And, black might be too strong. I might even go lighter. So I think I'll pick this lighter gray here, kind of a blue gray you see here. And in this one, this is the first time we've used a brush. In all of this activity this afternoon, this will be the first time we've used what they call a brush or a pencil or a pen. So I'm going to go to this Narinder pencil. And I'm going to adjust the size here. So I'm going to make it what I think is roughly the size of a joint that we're looking at. And it's too light, okay, but I'm not going to worry about that yet because it's in that same family. And these joints in the wood wouldn't be that black anyway. So I'll do a 2-finger tap. Now, very important here. Notice that I'm not going to sit here and try and make straight lines and think to myself, oh no, that looks like a log cabin. What do I do now? So I'm going to give you your first taste of what's called the Procreate Drawing Assist. And for that, we're going to go into the wrench menu, okay? So the decision point that you've come to is, I need to make straight lines that are parallel. And I've always heard Procreate can help me do this. How do we do it? And here's the answer. We go into the wrench menu, the actions menu, and it's not totally intuitive, but you're going to go into the canvas settings button here. And under that canvas setting is something called drawing guide. And you're now going to tap the drawing guide. And notice the minute you do that, this grid comes up. Now that doesn't mean that you're going to be drawing in grid squares exactly this size. It's Procreate's way of telling you, okay, boss, got it. We're all set to be drawing in Drawing Assist, okay? Now, here's the second counterintuitive weird thing. Even though I'm in the drawing guide, it still doesn't mean I'm drawing straight lines. So, you may scratch your head at this point and say, well, what good is that? And the trick is that you've got to go into the layer and tap the layer. You want to tap the layer that you've added for this operation. And suddenly, because you've activated Drawing Assist, this has popped up now. This never popped up before, but the first time you activate Drawing Assist in a Procreate document, this Drawing Assist option will be added to every one of your layers, no matter what. They weren't there before, but now no matter what layer I tap on, that Drawing Assist option is there. So that means that Procreate is now your friend, and from this point until you finish this drawing, you will always have that option because you've activated it over there. And what that means is that you have to then select that option, and now anything you draw in this layer is locked to either a horizontal or vertical. I'll make that darker so we can really see that. But now my drawing, my lines, even if I draw at an angle, so notice where my pencil's going, right? It doesn't matter. It's always going to lock these lines into either verticals or horizontals as long as it's in the 2D Drawing Assist mode, okay? So I still have these aesthetic choices. I have to make my joints the right aesthetic size, okay? So I'll keep playing with the pencil, and I'll keep tapping with 2 fingers until I get what I'm comfortable with. And remember, I have the option to make this lighter later, so I'm really just looking for the expressive line that will send the message to my client that this is a wood joint floor. So I'll go with something like that. And notice that grid is still there, and that can be somewhat annoying. So they give you the option to go back into the Actions menu, and I can now turn off the grid. And significantly, I'm not turning off Drawing Assist, so this is a little unusual, but I'm turning off literally the drawing guide in case I wanted that grid to help me keep drawing. But once it's activated, even after it's turned off, you can see there that the option to use Drawing Assist is still there. And there inside my drop-down menu, you can see the little check mark. So it's like, we're ready, boss. You just tell us. Now, if I want to go back to freehand, so just to give you a quick demonstration, here go my wood joints, right? But if I get to a point and say, you know what, I actually did want to draw this freehand, I can just go back into that layer and turn off drawing assist. And now I'm, home free. I can mess up any way I want. But in this case, we want to use drawing assist to create these wood boards. Even though this has taken me 10 minutes to explain, once you get this down, it'll just go like wildfire, okay? So I'm going to run these boards. I'm going to make them wide boards. I'm just going to eyeball it, and I'm going to go right under all this stuff. I'm not even going to worry if I go too far outside of the drawing, because I'm trying to free up my artistic sensibilities to do random width boards that look good and create kind of a casual feeling in this family room. And, if this is for a wealthy client, these could be fantastic reclaimed boards. And so they're going to be different widths like this, and they'll be matched like this. And it's really all just up to you, how precise you want to be. If you want to do equally spaced boards, you can follow those grids more carefully, but I really don't want to. I want to just get some random boards here. And because I'm in, and this one I think is too wide, so I'll just subdivide that. And because I'm in this mode where I'm either drawing this way or this way, no matter where my pencil goes, I'll just, while I'm in there, I'll just add some joints, again, for their expressive, suggestive power. And note that I'm being pretty sloppy by conventional standards. I'm not worried about precisely measuring these out. And that's a trick I learned long ago as a renderer trying to stay sane and get home to my family at night. That if no one's going to know the difference, you certainly don't want to spend any time on something. So I'll quickly finish this, and I hope you're all working along with me and adding your own joints to your own taste. Okay, so that's starting to be convincing, but there's probably one more thing that's going to make this even more convincing. Well, the first thing is we're going to do a little cleanup. So I'm going to go into the selection button, and we'll go back to our old friend, the rectangular mode in selection, and I'll drag this across. And notice it doesn't matter where I start. All I'm really worried about is where I end up, and I'm just going to clean off those lines, okay, from underneath that wood. And that wood's going to cover up the end somewhat, but I have to get rid of these. So I'll pull that selection across, and I'll use 3 fingers again, and do the 3-finger gentle swipe and hit cut, and off they go. And I'll do the same thing. Very often you'll see me switch to a finger to use these things. I'll tap there, and I'll pull across, and I'll do the 3-finger swipe, and I'll tap cut, and that cleans that up, okay? Now remember, we talked about this is where the value of this really comes in, because you can see those lines, and we can even start adjusting colors now if we want. So I can go to this floor down below the new line textures we added, and I can go up to the adjustments menu, the magic wand up here, and into hue, saturation, and brightness. Tap that, and up come my context menus for that. And now I can, really get in there. And again, it's gray, so it's not really a fair example, but I can get in here and adjust, this thing and make sure it's got the right feeling. And I can do the same with the lines that I did, okay? And so we'll do this. We're concentrating on the wood floor, and we'll add one more layer now, which will just bring this thing alive beyond belief, okay? And we'll go. This will be the texture, the wood grain texture inside each of these boards. So I'll go back to I want to go back to my base layer. So far we have 2 layers that are creating this lifelike, or semi-lifelike representation. I'll go back to the base layer, and between the base and the joints, it's not critical that it be in this order, but it just makes it simple to explain. I'll add another layer, and this is going to be our wood grain layer, okay? And the wood grain layer is going to be made, it keeps it so simple, it's going to be the same color as the floor, but it's going to be, and if you'll join me doing this, it's going to be in multiply blend mode, okay? Now I don't even have anything drawn on this layer, but I just know ahead of time that this is going to do the trick, okay? So go ahead and make this layer in between these 2 so far, and turn it to multiply blend mode. And now we're going to make sure, I'm going to go back and make sure I have this gray layer, or this gray color. And as you recall, I can do that. I don't want to go back into the palettes and get lost and try and find it. I'm just going to go to the paintbrush icon, and I am going to tap on the color picker. And with any luck, that will, let's see if that comes up yet. No. I'll tap on the color picker, and there it comes up. And it happens to be where I last tapped, I guess. I'm never quite sure. But it's picking that gray. And so that gray, I'm just going to drag it and drop and release it. And that gray is now preloaded back into my color selection, okay? So that's step 1. I suppose step 1 was to create the layer in multiply blend mode. Step 2 is to pick that color again. And you all remember now from your Photoshop skills that even though that color is gray, it's going to be darker when it goes over its parent gray, so to speak, because it's going to be multiplied. That same color will be multiplied twice. So I'm going to go into my brush menu, and if you're in the Architect's brush menu that we all began the course with, what you want to do now is scroll down a bit until you get to one of these texture brushes. Now, I like to use the flowing hairbrush, but you could use any of these. You could use the 6 lines brush, that's a little stiffer, or the fine hairbrush. But let's start with a flowing hairbrush. And I have it as number 30. I'm not sure if that's still showing up for you guys. So now I've got my layer and multiply, my color, and my brush, the flowing hairbrush. Oops. And if that happens to you, by the way, if it's already highlighted and you tap the brush again, then the kind of brush engineering page will show up, and you can just safely ignore this. But this will show you, if you ever need to be reminded of what that brush is going to produce, that double tap will produce that. So for instance, if you all join me for a second, tap the fine hairbrush once, as if we'd selected it, but then tap it again, and that's what that's going to look like, okay? But that's getting a little too precious for our purposes. So I'm going to go to the flowing hairbrush, and all the stars are aligned now, and I'm just going to come in and start drawing, or start adding, I should say, texture. Now, for some reason, my opacity is down, so I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to study the size of the brush again, and then I'll just start testing these. And that's probably that's a little too dense. So I'm going to double tap until I get back out. I'll make it even bigger. And I'm just going to start, notice I'm holding my pencil vertically, because I find that it creates the most faithful version of these brushes if you hold it vertically. And I'm not doing individual boards, I'm just kind of getting the overall effect. And I'm going to play around. Sometimes I'm going to brush lightly, sometimes I'm going to brush darker. I can even change the size of the brush if I'm not happy with certain, whether it's getting the small boards accurately enough, okay? And you personally may find something that works much better for you. Like I'll switch to, if I come in close, you can see where it's starting to accomplish our purpose. It will help even more if I go into, while you're up close like this, let's say come back over to where you first started. Okay, and go to your adjustments menu, go to the magic wand, and go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And this shows you the kind of miracle of this layering idea, is that even though I've used the same color in multiply mode, I can actually darken this now to create more or less of this grain effect. Okay, and I could even change the color if I wanted to, but really, I'm only concerned with being able to perceive this grain from a distance like this. So I'll just finish up, I'll make sure I'm still in that brush, and there I am, still in the flowing hairbrush, and I'll finish this up. And I tend to be pretty, non-exact with this. You can tell I'm just sort of freehanding this and not worrying about the fact that I'm going over this stuff. And I'll finish there. And some of you may really prefer the six stripe brush or whatever that was there. You'll have to play around with it. The 6-line brush works pretty good too. So now I've got what looks like a mess, but we'll go back to our friendly selection tool, and we're in rectangular mode. And this time I'm going to use a real shortcut. I'm going to go to this corner where I know I want to start. Now, these walls, I want to get all that wood grain out of those walls. So I'll start at that corner and drag all the way down to the opposite corner. And in this case, what we're going to do is hit the invert selection button. And so now everything I drew that I want to keep is protected by the marching ants, and everything I want to get rid of, all the overages, are outside of the marching ants. So now we're back to our magic 3-finger swipe. And I'll graze across the surface of the glass and hit cut, and kaboom. Instant and super clean editing of that surface, okay? And again, I can go back into any of these. So let's say I'll make the joints are a little too light maybe now. So I'll go back into the joint layer, which for me was layer 9, and it was assisted. You can see in that little note. And I'll go back to the adjustments menu, and hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'm just going to make the joints a little darker. And it's a little more expressive. So that's good. Now let's do the same thing for the wood credenza that we made that's going to run under the screen, okay? And anybody that wants to rush ahead because you're super proud of your skills, go ahead. But I'll start by, this one's going to be easier because we only have the grain. We don't have any joints to add. So I'm going to start by tapping on layer 4. For me, layer 4 was that wood color. And you can always test this, by the way, by just tapping that checkbox. And when the checkbox turns off, you know you've got the right layer, okay? And so remember, the first step is to add a layer, and to make that layer, create that layer in multiply blend mode, because I'm going to be lazy and just borrow the same color, but because it's in multiply blend mode, it's going to show up just the right amount, okay? So there I am in multiply blend mode. The next step is to go back to my color, but how do I do that without getting lost in all of my palettes and like, forget it, that's a pain. I'm just going to make sure that I'm in the brush icon, and then I'm going to tap the color eyedropper, the select color selector. Up comes the magic wheel. I drag it to this point. Now notice it's still gray up here, but I'm going to drag it to the color. It's still gray up there, but the minute I release this, boom, there goes my underlying wood color, okay? And now I'm going to pick the same thing, but this time let's try that. We'll try that 6 lines brush and see if that it might be too structured, too precise for us. So I'll just, remember, I've got to pull this up and over. So I'm just going to touch the screen now, and this will all go away when I do this. You'll see this. And I'll just use 2 fingers. You know, you don't always have to use the 2 same fingers. I'll just sort of pull this up. And when I'm working fast, believe me, you'll invent all kinds of crazy ways to re-implement these things. So now we've got our layer in multiply blend mode. We've got our color, and we've got our brush. And we're just going to come right in here. Okay, and you can see that's way too structured, okay? Even when I make it small, you know, I presumably I could do that if I had a certain look I was after. You know, you notice that I'm going over twice in some cases, and that's not bad. So I'll stick with that. You know, you guys decide what you want to do. But, so, and again, I'll go back, you know, if you're happy with what you got, don't worry about it, but I'll go back with my 2-finger taps and show you that again. I'll do half of it in big. And so it's always going to be like way too literal with the first pass, okay? But then you can just like pass again, right, kind of in between there, and you might like what you start to see, right? And just sort of like throw some stuff in, go slightly sideways, really doesn't matter. The other thing you can do, and I'll start on this side, is it's almost like if you had a hiccup while you were drawing, like you come along and you just sort of like add a little, just a little jiggle. And it'll have a very realistic kind of effect like you would see in nature where grains aren't always perfectly smooth for some species of wood. So I'm happy with that. Now here we've got a little bit more of a trouble. It's not really bad, but this is another teaching moment where if I wanted to do that trick where I got rid of the excess, and again, it's barely noticeable here. So there's 2 other ways you could do this. One is that I could go into the eraser, and when it's not bad, I'll just pick this flat marker, which gives me the most control. It's kind of a rectangle. And if I come over to the brush size adjuster and move that slider, I can get it at this kind of very manageable size. And then I can just come in here and literally erase the excess grain that way, okay? So that is sometimes a quicker alternative to going all the way back and being so worried about, you know, selecting the whole thing again, okay? So that's one option. Now I'm going to put those extra lines back in again. So I want to show you another option. So I'll go there and there, and you can see that they're starting to come over. Another option, and I'm throwing a lot at you, but you'll be picking this up in no time flat, is this layer where I've just created this wood grain, and I can verify that by turning that checkbox on and off, okay? So that's where the wood grain is. That doesn't help me. That's where I have to erase some of it. But I can go back down to the base layer that we took all that time selecting, and I can go back down there and tap once to highlight the layer, and a second time to bring up the drop-down menu, and look right there, second from the top is select. Now watch what happens, and you watch on your own screen. When you select that and tap it once, back come the marching ants, but in the exact shape of that selection, which is just like Photoshop and doing a right-click on the layer and selecting the contents of the layer. So how does that help me? Well, this isn't a great example because it's a fairly small and inoffensive example of what we're trying to do, but I can now invert that selection, and now the whole shape of that wood sideboard is selected. And even when it's selected, I can bounce around amongst layers, okay? I'll go back to my red carpet, it doesn't matter. And I'll go to that layer that has the wood grain itself, because those are the lines I want to get rid of. And the marching ants have blocked off the part I want to keep. And now I can just do the 3-finger swipe. And it's going to be hard to see, but look at this little straggler line here. When I do the 3-finger swipe and hit cut, away goes that line, away go the marching ants. And boom, Procreate has saved you another bit of time. And now to make that wood grain a little more expressive, we'll make sure we're in the right layer, and we'll go back to our best friend, adjustments menu, hue, saturation, brightness. And again, you can see the power of darkening these things and truly never having to pick the right color the first time. It's just complete liberation. In watercolor, this used to be the hardest thing in the world to have to keep doing and getting right. But in Procreate, you just over and over again adjust these colors and start to pull them into harmony with each other. It's really terrific. Now I'm going to go into this. Let's say that this tomato red carpet, it's our next biggest thing. And it looks very flat at the moment. Looks like a rubber yoga mat. And I'm going to go into the layers and find that carpet. And this will be our next version of how to create texture and lifelike textures. And I'm going to add a layer above that carpet now. And this time, I'm again going to make it in multiply blend mode. So you'll find yourself doing this over and over again when you're rendering. And now we've done that. We've created a new layer in multiply blend mode. Now we're going to select that color. And you all remember how to do that. I'll come over here, tap the color picker, and you never know quite where that thing's going to show up, but just keep an eye out for it. And I'll drag it across to the tomato red, and even though I've dragged it across, notice the color hasn't been picked yet. It's not till I let it go, voila, and there's the color picked. Now, we're in multiply blend mode. This one doesn't have wood grain, but it has the possibility of all these other wonderful brushes, okay? And we'll do a couple of these because I really want to show you the potential that these things have. So let's start with something that's called the Nicky Roll brush. And the Nicky Roll brush is typical of these digital brushes. If I come over here and adjust the size, you can see that these individual artists in the Procreate community have created these things with all of these random textures to them. So I'll just go ahead and make the brush pretty big. And without double checking that I've got it right, I'm going to start lightly drawing over this carpet, okay? And just watch what happens as you do it too. Notice how the color just starts, just sort of adds a blotchiness. Now it's hard to see that red again, but remember, because you can see it here over the wood, which we obviously have to get rid of. But when you blow that up, you can see that that random grain can be very useful in suggesting the texture of the carpet itself. And I can come in here, and this is really where the power of the adjustments menu comes in. In this case, it's going to make a big difference when we adjust this. And let's even start with hue, first of all the way on the left. And look at the kind of totally cool effects. Like maybe they love tomato red and rust together, you know, or maybe they just love tomato red, but it needs to be much less saturated, and maybe it needs to be barely discernible from the background. So you have all kind of options here. And of course, we can go back and do that same routine where we go into the layer and we go into the lower layer that has the original rectangle that we picked out and tap on that lower layer, tap again to select the layer, tap once more in the selection context menu to invert the layer. And now I want to go back up to layer 12 that had the texture. And now that 3-finger swipe is going to work. So here again, I can, I'm not totally happy with that because it's kind of getting too dark. But it almost looks, as I look at this, it looks exactly like a carpet that, you know, looking back on it down from 20 feet, you might see exactly that kind of pattern. And then I encourage you to play with the other brushes. There's brushes, if we just visit those brushes for a second, that's sort of my favorite one. I have it way up there, but you know, these brushes are incredible. The turpentine brush is really wild. And you just can't predict what's going to happen. And that's just the brushes I've selected, whereas you can go into the original Procreate lists of brushes. And I mean, this would be wild. I'm doing this, you guys don't have to play with me, but I'll turn this layer off just to show you the power of these things. And I'll add a layer above. I'm going to pick a black or a dark gray. And now I'm going to do the carpet in my grandmother's living room in just seconds. And this time I'll do a little shortcut. I'll go ahead and select the layer ahead of time, back to the tomato red rectangle. I'll select it. And now I won't be able to draw beyond the borders. I'm protected in advance. So so everything I do will be contained in that rectangle. I'll go back to the layer I added. I don't even have to put in multiply blend mode if I don't want to, because I'm going to use this black now. And I'm just going to create the world's fastest Victorian carpet. Actually, that's like Andy Warhol's Victorian carpet, so I take it back. But you know, how fantastic, right? So, and again, when you get to that point, if you did like something like that, you could then mess around with it in saturation. You could turn it the opposite, right, and have all these incredible effects. So I'll turn that off because that's going to make me too happy. But you get the idea. So we'll do one more example here, and I'll let you guys on your own. So you remember when we were back in shadow mode, and we had in SketchUp we had shadows being cast by this furniture, and it really kind of added a lot to it. So there's a very quick way to create shadows automatically create shadows under your floor plans. So I want to leave a drop shadow under these items, okay? And I have 4 items that have the ability to create drop shadows, and I have to kind of find them together. So there's these 2 seating arrangements. There's this table here, and there's this glass top ottoman we've got here. But now these are the 3 items involved. Here's the ottoman, here's the side table, and here are the 2 chairs. So we're going to do that right to left swipe again that we did once before, and we're going to hit duplicate. So now there are 2 ottoman shapes, and now, I'm sorry, 2 seating layer shapes. Now I'm going to duplicate the ottoman and do this with me, and we'll do it. Remember, it's a gentle right to left swipe, and then you're going to hit duplicate, and you'll see immediately 2 of those happen. And then a gentle right to left swipe on the little side table, and you're going to hit duplicate. Now we have 2 of each of those, which seems kind of silly, like what good is that? But we're going to move them back into groups. So I'm going to tap on the first of each of those things and move it back up with its cousins, okay? So and sometimes it doesn't, you have to sort of tap and wiggle it. Now see, that's wrong. I'm going to two-finger tap out of that. Sometimes to get these layers to move, you have to kind of finagle them. You have to hold them for a while and wiggle them. Make sure you don't drop it on another layer. Just kind of wiggle it in between. And then when you're pretty sure you've got it, just move it up to where you want it and let it go. So now I have the original set of furniture up here, and then the 3 copies down here. So at this point, I'm going to highlight the top of the 3 copies. I'll highlight that layer. Now I'm going to swipe left to right this time. Left to right, left to right, so that the lighter blue indicates that all of these are now going to work together, okay? And I'm going to now hit this button, this group button. And the whole idea here is I'm trying to save time because I'm going to create drop shadows out of these same shapes. And I'm going to create the 3 drop shadows at the same time. So now I'm going to close the group icon, and I'm going to tap once more and flatten the group, okay? So now all 3 of those, you can't see them because they're still hiding under these originals, but all of 3 of these have become locked together. The next thing I'm going to do, seems like a lot of steps, but we're going to do it again and practice it. Next thing I'm going to do is go into the adjustments menu, and this is another great use of this adjustments menu. I'm going to go into hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'm going to, even though I can't see them, I'm going to make them totally black. I'm just going to take the brightness all the way down, okay? Now, after hitting all these buttons, the layer menus disappear, but that doesn't matter. But if I open it back up, see how those have all turned to black now, okay? So that's step 1. I've got everything together on the layer that's going to work together. Step 2 is I'm going to move this roughly into position to create the shadows that I want to create. And they're not going to be accurate shadows, but they're going to be expressive shadows, okay? And so to do that, I'm going to touch the move and transform icon. And you can see that it's selected those 3 things, and it's telling me we're all ready to go. We're all hiding under here. Just take it on faith that we're here, but we're ready to go. And now I'm going to slightly move that layer until those shadows appear. Okay, and there they are. And they're probably too strong. So now I have several options. And the first is to, first of all, I want to make sure, because they are shadows, I want to see all the details under them. So I'm going to go back and do that trick that we do and multiply blend mode, okay? Now again, because it's black, it's still darker than anything under it. But the final step is going to be to come up here to adjustments once again. And this time I'm going to lighten it. And when I do that, watch what happens under these things. Up comes the detail underneath. Now I haven't made it transparent. It's the same effect as if I had made it transparent, but I've just lightened it so it's showing more of what's underneath, okay? And from time to time, and now we're into like advanced level 3, so don't worry if you don't quite get this right now. But from time to time, I've talked about why I stay away from making a layer transparent versus lightening it over in hue, saturation, and brightness. And this is a great time to explain that. Because if I tap on the blending mode icon here, you can see opacity is still fully up. So really only the multiply blend mode plus the lighter color that's now in there is what's making this wonderful shadow effect. But the reason I like to keep it this way is because I can actually tap this layer and select the contents of that layer. And if I want to, if in your rendering prowess and your rendering experience, you happen to like slightly different color shadows, and I like a little bit of violet in my shadows, a little bit of blue violet in my shadows. So I can come here and pick this kind of gray violet and watch what happens now. That's preloaded here. And watch what happens if I hit the fill layer. If I hit the fill command in this layer now, it's going to switch that gray to this gray violet. And let's see how big a difference that makes. Okay. And that's not necessarily the right gray violet to use, but again, I can go back into hue, saturation, brightness, and I can saturate that. So now we're getting into Hanna-Barbera cartoons, the Flintstones, and Disney, and you really can create these wonderful effects. And again, this all goes to this idea of how Procreate teaches you so much about color, and you can really create the emotions that you want to create. So here's a much bluer color, and that's starting to work better, arguably, with a tomato red and the gray palette. But you really just, you can just play for hours and find the colors you want. And then if you fall in love with a color that you've created like this, then you can come back into that layer. Now I'll turn that layer on and off again just to prove that we're there. And if you temporarily turn the blending mode back to normal, then you'll see what color is creating that effect. So now that color's solid, and I could use the color picker to add it to any one of my palette menus. And you'll notice if you go into my palettes, you'll see a lot of these gray violets, which really I've never used for any actual room palette. But they're all there because at different times I've created these shadows. And so I'll just go back for a second into that layer, into that blending mode, and we'll go back to multiply. And there's that magic transformation once again. And it just can really add zip to a drawing if your drawing isn't the greatest, and you wish there was something more to it, more of this. But you can even come inside these items, okay? And let's do the same thing. You guys don't have to do this with me, but I'll just, for dessert, I'll show you this very quickly. I'll come into a new layer above the sofa, the seating layer itself. I'll add a new layer. And I'll prearrange it to multiply blend mode. I'll pick the color. I'll activate the brush and then tap the color picker. It comes up. I'll go to the sofa itself. And all that's ready for my next action now. Now I'll go into the selection tool and freehand, and I will make up a shadow. And you don't have, I'm good at this because I've had to do this for, 20 years plus. But this arm is going to throw a shadow onto this seat, and this pillow is going to throw a shadow onto the seat. And I'll just kind of make that up very quickly and bring it across here. And then, of course, that shadow won't throw a shadow there because those are hard against each other, and the light's coming from here. So I'll do that, and then I'll come over here, and then I'll finish up here, bring it down here, and then I'll pull that color over into that, and you can see I've got the slightest shadow in there. It needs to be darker to get the point across, but it really starts to add this whole fun dimension to this. You can also come into your eraser and pick a nice soft eraser. I like this number 10 airbrush. Make sure the size is just about right compared to this pillow. And I can come over here and just slightly lighten the top of that pillow because it wouldn't be a strong shadow there. It would just be softer there until it actually hit the sofa or hit the swivel chair. And so there you have it. To dive deeper, check out the courses listed in the description below. Some exciting changes are coming to the iPad for Architects business model. Ways to learn that are more affordable, more flexible, and more tailored to your individual learning style. And to go deeper for how these tools can transform your architectural drawing, check out this video next, and I will see you in the next lesson.